Elisha, who lives in Western Kenya, had become very tired of organized religion. But he allowed his wife to attend the local Pentecostal church. One day she invited the pastor for lunch. As they sat and ate, the pastor was complaining about the committee in his church, whose purpose was to build a brick construction building, but they were each and every month using their money for their own ends. Elisha was annoyed about that, so he said to the pastor, "I can come and help you. I know building and I know how to do accounts." So there and then he was appointed in the Pentecostal church as the account servant and the building overseer. And what he did is they collected money each month. He would prepare an accounts report and read it to the congregation. At the same time, his wife had begun to study the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses. He liked hearing the answers to Bible questions. He even studied some of the Require brochure for a few lessons, but discontinued the study when it invited him to attend meetings at the Kingdom Hall. Meantime, at his church, the building committee were getting frustrated. Money was now pouring in to build the church, and his 3 fellow committee members couldn't get their hands on it. So they conspired to kill him. In Western Kenya, you kill people in 2 ways, either by spiritism or by poisoning them. Well, because they were Christians, of course they couldn't use spiritism. So they decided to poison him. The opportune day came when a member of the congregation died and a funeral was arranged. A funeral in Kenya is more joyous than a wedding, because a cow is slaughtered and everybody feasts for the entire day. So a funeral is always well attended by usually hundreds of people. Elisha went along to the funeral service, and he sat at the head table with the priests and pastors of the church, and the committee arranged to poison his food. When the young woman came into the funeral gathering carrying the plate, there was some confusion at the main table, and the plate was placed before an elderly gentleman who proceeded to enjoy his food only briefly, becoming violently ill within a few minutes of eating. He was rushed to the hospital, and thankfully the hospital saved his life. But Elisha came to know of the plot. What he'd been hearing at home had gone into his heart, but he'd not yet made a decision. When he saw the difference between those who serve God and those who do not, he immediately left the church and began attending meetings at the Kingdom Hall. Elisha, very happily, is now our brother, recently appointed as a ministerial servant, and to his great joy he helped in constructing one of the 322 Kingdom Halls that we've constructed in Kenya over the past 7 years. You people will certainly see the distinction between a righteous person and a person who's not righteous, between one serving God and one who is not serving him. Those words written in Malachi chapter 3 verse 18 are proved all over the world consistently, but how much in missionary service we see that firsthand, and especially when our brothers and sisters endure trials. Tonight, some of our experiences will just help us to see how our enduring trials, how our standing out as different from people of other religions or from worldly people, can be a witness in itself. Let's open the Bible to James chapter 1 and verse 2. Of course, Jehovah's people are very different in many ways because of the love they have amongst themselves, the lack of racial prejudice, the non-involvement in political strife. But more often than not, the way Jehovah's people endure trials gives a witness beyond what we may recognize. James chapter 1 and verse 2, first century member of the governing body, wrote the brothers, "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you meet with various trials." Now, when we think of those words, of course, we don't feel joy when we are tried. But the beginning of the text says, consider, think, use your mental abilities to view a trial as something that can bring joy. In other words, don't respond just according to human emotion, imperfect human traditions. Think about the trial. Think, how can this trial bring joy to me and my God? I've no doubt, brothers and sisters, that you've heard the news earlier this year about the situation in Kenya where near civil war broke out after the election. Of course, even before the war, even before the conflict, Kenyan people were very poor materially. Recently, all the prices of everything has risen. And, of course, persons who have no hope in the true God Jehovah are really in a hopeless plight. But how do our brothers and sisters view the drastically bad economic situation? James 1 verse 2. They consider it all joy to meet with that trial. For example, recently we had the first tribal language assembly in Kenya. In the land of Kenya we have a national language of Swahili, but there are many, many different tribes, and it was the first time to have a multi-language assembly. Teresa, who is a widowed sister, she wished to attend this first assembly in her own language, a language called the Luo tongue. The problem was that the assembly was being held about 50 miles from her house, and she had not 1 Kenya shilling in her pocket the week of the assembly. She talked with my wife on the visit that we were doing, and she said, "Sister Jazz, I really would like to go to the assembly, but I have nothing." And she wasn't saying that to ask, "Can you help me with money?" She was asked, "Can you give me some counsel? What can I do?" So my wife, Sister Jazz, said, "Do you have any chickens?" "Yeah, I have some chickens." "Why not sell one? You get the fare and let Jehovah take care of the rest of the arrangements." Well, she tried, but no one was buying that week. But she did try. Friday, the day before the assembly, unexpectedly, a worldly neighbour arrived at her house. And the neighbour said, "You remember 6 months ago you gave me a school uniform for my little boy? I never gave you anything. Here's 50 Kenya shillings just as a thank you." Now, Teresa, our sister, she knows it's more than 50 shillings to drive to the assembly and back. But she says, "Okay, this is Jehovah. Let me get up early in the morning. I'll walk the first 7 or 8 kilometres, and then I'll pick up the vehicle further up the road." So she gets up 5 o'clock in the morning, Saturday, off she goes, walks for many kilometres until she reaches the tarmac road. She boards the vehicle and sits right at the back. When the man collecting the fares comes, he tells her it's 80 shillings. So she gives him the 50 and just puts her head down. He starts to complain, "Hey, Mama, it's 50 shillings you've given me, and you're supposed to pay 80. She says, I'm sorry. I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going for my assembly. Please forgive me." And the people on the vehicle start to support her. "Yeah, this Mama, she's a Christian, you know. She's going for the assembly. You let her go." So she goes. She gets to the assembly site. As is the case with many times in Kenya, all the brothers and sisters have brought enough food to share with others. And during the program, another sister comes to her and says, "You've really tried hard to come today. Here's 50 shillings to help you with your expenses to get home." So she enjoys the program. In the evening, they go back to the tarmac. And as they're waiting for the vehicle, she's praying, "What do I do? It's 80 shillings. I only have 50. Suddenly a vehicle full of school teachers arrives. All of them disembark. The driver says to the brothers and sisters, "Where are you going?" They say, "Yala." "Oh, I'm going to Yala." "Me as well." "Jump in." They all jump in. He drops her back at home, and when she gets in the house, what's in her pocket? 50 shillings. Consider it all joy when you meet with various trials. How do you think that sister felt in the evening of attending that assembly? When we look at James chapter 1 and verse 2, perhaps even we had it discussed last week in our service meeting, when it says, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you meet with various trials, the Greek word means many-tinted, or in modern English, many-coloured trials. And it's as though Jehovah kind of polishes and colours us in with the various things that we go through. Isn't that true? See, in Kenya, people do not have very much materially. In fact, the standard of living is very poor. But does that make them bitter people? Quite the opposite. For example, if you greet someone in the Kenyan coast, the greeting in Swahili is habari yako. It means, how are you? What is your news? Many times a Kenyan will reply, nimeshukuru, which means, I am thankful. How are you? I am thankful. Meaning, this morning I have woken up, I've taken some tea, I'm alive, I'm thankful. How many times in Yorkshire, how are you? In West Africa, similar greeting. The West Africans ask, howdy buddy? How's the body? Howdy buddy? And even a worldly person can reply, I tell Jehovah tanki. Imagine you greet a worldly person on the Bramley High Street. Howdy buddy? I tell Jehovah tanki. I tell Jehovah thank you. See, so trials don't necessarily embitter anyone, inhibit anyone, damage anyone. It's like these many tints that just polish our personality. I'm sure you can imagine in missionary service sometimes there's some unusual trials that have to kind of polish you a little bit. I remember Sister Jazz and I last year learned that a problem according to a European is not a problem according to a Kenyan. We went to a congregation deep in the bush for a circuit visit. It was a very stressful drive to get there because there was no real made roads. It was just a dust road. So we eventually get to the place where the brothers stay, and the brother and his wife welcome us in. And what we always do Tuesday afternoon, first we have to set up the room and put up the mosquito net, and then we have this special chemical you put on the bed in case there's any bugs and such like that. So Jazz is doing these things, and I look up just above the bed. About 10 feet up the wall, there are 7 bats hanging from the wall. The magnificent 7. So I think, it's Tuesday today, can I cope with that till Sunday? And Jazz is much tougher than me, so she's seen them already, she's not bothered, but, I'm a man, so I'm scared of bats. So I call the brother. He's called Asio. Asio. He knows from my face there's a problem. What's the problem? I said, have you seen those? He looks, he says, yeah. He says, I tried to smoke them out this morning. He says, I've put chemicals and I couldn't get rid of them. And then in absolute innocence he says, but you called me because there's a problem. What's the problem? Nothing, don't worry. And they stayed the whole week, and we stayed the whole week. At night we could hear them flying about, but the mosquito net was over and tucked in. So they didn't bother us, and we didn't bother them. Now I know that before going to missionary service that would have been a drastic problem in anyone's house. But we've slept at that place since then, and they're still there. So sometimes trials make us see problems, do they not, in a new perspective. Here in James chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, if we just go back, the scripture says, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you meet with various trials, knowing, as you do, that this tested quality of your faith works out endurance. Of course, verse 3, that's the reason for the joy mentioned in verse 2, that we have this now not theoretical faith, but a tested quality of faith, and that brings us the pleasure of knowing we have endured. On December 27th last year, Kenya had a general election. And the ruling gentleman, who was from the largest tribe, the Kikuyu, was running against the man who was the big man in the second biggest tribe, the Luo. So really the election was all about tribe. And when the ruling party deceived people and stole the election, of course it ignited a powder keg of intertribal hatred. The roads were all blocked over the entire country. Tyres were burned on the roads. Gangs of youths, even up to 300 strong, manned the roadblocks. If you were of their tribe, you could pass by paying a fine. If you were of the opposing tribe, they simply took you from the car and killed you. Today, 250,000 Kenyans are in internal displacement camps because they cannot go back to the place they've called home for 40 years. In excess of 1,500 people were murdered. But very happily, according to our branch office in Nairobi, not one brother or sister lost his or her life. Many lost their homes, many lost their businesses, their personal property, but not one of them lost their lives. One brother, who lives just round the corner from our missionary home, was of a tribe not indigenous to the area. Did the trial he went through test his faith and refine him? Well, he's called Brother Mabea. And on Sunday morning, just after the election, the whole city had been rioting all night. The brothers decided we'll still go ahead with our meetings. So Brother Mabea with his family left home at 8:45, went round the corner. They didn't use the Kingdom Hall because it was too dangerous. They had small meetings in brothers' houses to do the public talk and watchtower. When Brother Mabea returned at lunchtime, he has only a small house. There's a front lounge room with a sofa, small wicker sofa. Just above the sofa at head height, there was a hole in the wall, and there was a bullet on the floor in front of the sofa. Our brother realized the import of going to the meetings in a new way that day. He was escorted by the police from the area, and he's still alive and well to this day. Sister Jazz and I, we have been in the travelling work up in Western Kenya. Because all the roads were blocked and burning tyres on them and such, we made 2 congregations visits, but we couldn't carry on much after that. So the branch decided to evacuate us in the beginning of February. And they took us from Western Kenya by plane down to the port city of Mombasa, where relative calm has endured for a while. Now, on that day, when we packed our bags, and just the amount you're allowed to take on a domestic flight, about 20 kilos of luggage, we really came away from our assignment thinking, how can there possibly be any joy in this? To just leave the brothers and sisters you're supposed to be serving because you physically can't reach them. Well, we boarded the aircraft, and then in the capital, Nairobi, we had to change planes. While we were waiting in the airport, a large crowd came into the airport of very well-dressed people. They were all greeting one another. And when the crowd began to disperse, there stood in front of me was the man who had won the presidential election, the man who's the leader of the Luo tribe. In our luggage, we had a brand new copy of the Bible Teach Book produced in his tribal language. I watched where he went. He headed off into the VIP lounge, and I said, this is the opportunity. This is the only time we're going to get to witness to the man who should be the president of Kenya. So I took courage, I prayed, I went to Jazz, I said, Jazz, the president's here. Can you go and talk to him? Because she has learned how to speak that tribal language. So she took the book, She walked past the VIP lounge. There he was reading the newspaper. She prayed. She went into the VIP lounge and put her hand on his shoulder and said, Honourable Mr. Odinga. He looks up from the newspaper. She put the Bible teach book in front of him and said, I'd like to present you with a gift. At that second, the bodyguard realised what had happened. The armed bodyguard, who Jazz hadn't seen. He leapt out of his seat. The would-be president looked at the bodyguard, looked at the book, looked at Jazz, read the title of the book in the perfect Luo that he speaks. She spoke back to him in Luo, explaining, my name is Jazz, I live in Kisumu City, I'm travelling to Mombasa with my husband, here is a gift. And in the Luo tongue he said, Erokamano, which means thank you very much, with a big smile on his face. She ran out of there like a cat on a hot tin roof. 4 weeks later, he was appointed as the Prime Minister of Kenya. And now he is accompanied by a cavalcade of Mercedes with police outriders armed with machine guns. Nobody can get anywhere near to that man. But he has, the Prime Minister of Kenya, what does the Bible really teach? In his tribal tongue. I would hazard the only piece of Bible literature in that tribal tongue. Sometimes dealing with officials in third world countries can be a trial because corruption is rife, and just to get a simple service like a driving license can be very, very difficult. You feel anxious when you go into a government office. But we remember what the scripture said, don't we? Consider it all joy when you meet with various trials. Just another small experience about dealing with officials. Last year, during the period we were going up to the district convention, we had quite a body of work to do to prepare the district convention, and so we didn't get a big opportunity, Sister Jazz and I, to share in the work of distributing the tract. So the day before the convention, we had quite a wad of tracts left, so we decided, let's go out into the city and invite people. We realised at the same time that our residency permits had expired, and they'd expired by 2 months. Now, if you don't have a residency permit and a policeman stops you and asks to see it, you go to prison until they do the trial and deport you. So it's a serious situation. So what to do? Okay, we're distributing the tracts. The government office is in town and it opens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we do our tract work. We rush to the government office. Queue of people. We sit in there. Apologetically, I tell them, I'm sorry, I really forgot about this. I've come to renew my permit and da-da-da. Really, really grovelling. Until this man invites us into his office. And he is of this Luo tribe, and we're trying to talk in his language to him to kind of jolly him along, and he's just stone-faced and having none of it. And he takes my fingerprints to put on the form. He doesn't have a word. The office is deathly silent. Jazzy stood at the side of me looking anxious. And at that moment, another man comes in. And he says, straight-faced, when you've finished here, you will come to my office. We finished the fingerprinting and all this with Mr. Unfriendly. And we follow this man now to his office. But his office is deep inside the building. You go past metal shuttered doors. There's 2 soldiers with automatic weapons guarding the doors. We pass through. We go down the corridor. And I'm really thinking, this might be the last time I see light for a long time. We follow him into the office. He closes the door. He still hasn't spoken. He sits down behind this enormous desk. He sits down, he faces, and he puts the hands like this. He says, my name is Mr. Odori, and you are? I say, my name is David Haworth, and this is Jazz. I have a question. How may I follow the Christ? Jazz and I look down at our lapel badges, which are bumping backward and forward on top of our heart. He says, my wife and I, we had a baby girl and she died. I am a Christian, but I'd like to follow the Christ more closely. How can I do it? So now it's about a minute and a half. My composure comes back. I was really scared. We arranged to go back. We go back into the immigration department the following week, down past the machine guns, through the metal doors, into the office, and we leave him the Bible teach book. So I explain the study arrangement. He says, I'd like to study in my lunchtime. So we start the study, and he just says, before we go any further, let's just get to the point. Who's Jesus Christ? So we open Matthew 16, 13 through 16, where Jesus said, who do people say that I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He says, right, fine, let's carry on. Because we're in the travelling work, we can't conduct a study regularly, but that young man has now legalised his marriage with his lady he was living with, and he's began studying with one of the fellow missionaries. So we will see how that experience turns out. But from a very trialsome, potentially dangerous situation, what a joy to be asked a question like that. Just go back to James chapter 1. And verse 3, we want to focus on an expression that James uses. We see in James chapter 1, verse 2, it says, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you meet with various trials, knowing as you do that this tested quality of your faith works out endurance. You know, there's a big difference, isn't there, between theoretical faith, things that we maybe believe, and then things that we've actually passed through and seen, proved and tested. See, for example, we know that Jehovah will protect us, theoretically. But maybe we've never had to be in a situation where he's protected our life, where he's saved us in a life or death situation. But when we pass through various trials and see that by sticking to his principles, he indeed does that, now our faith takes on a whole new dimension. Is that not true? When we stick to Jehovah's law, even if life is at risk, now that tested quality of our faith becomes something new. During the conflicts in Kenya, several of our brothers were tested in that when persons were trying to take away their gift of life, our brothers were still willing to respect their aggressors' gift of life. Recently, we talked with one of our brothers from Bethel. He had been delivering literature at the time of the political violence, and as he left Haworth City, he got 20 kilometres down the road when a massive mob of people from the other tribe confronted the Bethel vehicle. And our brother had no news that this was going to happen, so he was driving the vehicle with the windows wound down. The mob tried to get onto the Bethel vehicle as it made its way through them, and one young man succeeded and stood on the footplate and grabbed hold of the steering wheel through the window. And he asked our brother Ibrahim, which tribe are you? Which tribe are you? You are our enemy. So Ibrahim is in a difficult situation because he knows if I stop, they'll take me from the vehicle. They have machetes, sticks, they'll kill me. At the same time, I have to respect this man's gift of life. So what does he do? He slightly accelerates and he moves the Bethel vehicle further down the road. After a kilometre, the man's saying, you're our enemy, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. 2 kilometres. Still, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. 3 kilometres. Let me get off, let me get off. 4 kilometres. I'm sorry, I think I've made a mistake. I need to leave. Ibrahim just carries on driving. 5 kilometres. 6. So, hey, please, it's getting near dark. Let me get off and go back home. 10 kilometres. Our brother slows down, he says, shuka, which means jump off. And the young man jumps off and drives away. We asked our Bethel brother, how did you feel about that young man? He said, I felt sorry for him because he was so smartly dressed, he had a nice haircut, and I didn't want him to be harmed. Imagine someone's trying to kill you, they're trying to stop your vehicle so their friends can beat you to death. And our brother says, I liked him, he was dressed nice, he had a nice haircut, I didn't want to hurt him. Of course, our brother's conscience was rewarded. Our brother's faith was rewarded. when that occurred. Another kind of slightly amusing situation, we had a brother of the opposing tribe living deep in the rural areas of our circuit, and they had a mobile telephone, so the brothers were concerned about him. They called him and said, "We're going to do this to help you out. At midnight precisely, leave your house, cover your head with a kind of wrap of some description, and we're going to send a brother. He'll walk up the road. Because you don't know our tribal language, what he's going to do is sing a kingdom song every time he meets someone. So if it's you with your face covered, you hear someone singing a kingdom song, that's your brother." So our brother Absalom sets off, and he's looking for his friend from another tribe. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, he's walking the 10 kilometers up to his house, and he's singing a kingdom song to every man who passes. And of course, they think he's drunk. He eventually gets right to the brother's house, and the brother explains, "I couldn't leave because my house was surrounded by the opposing tribe. Now they've gone, we can go together." So our brother says, "Okay, you do this, you cover your face, and when we get to each roadblock, I'll speak in the tribal tongue, and you just try and look like you agree." So they walk off, they've both got their heads covered, the roadblock comes, our brother Absalom, he starts talking in the tribal tongue, and the brother at the side says, through every single roadblock, until they get to the police station, and the police escort him away. But imagine just doing that to help your brother get out, walking through a tribal area where you know you'll be killed, just for being with someone of the other tribe. So, the tested quality of faith of our brothers and sisters really has moved forward over the past few months. Let's just open the Bible to Malachi chapter 3 and verse 18. Here is a prophecy about God's people in the time of the end, a people who withstand tests and trials of every imaginable kind. Jehovah himself makes comment about the visible difference in his people. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 18. It says, "And you people will again certainly see the distinction between a righteous one and a wicked one, between one serving God and one who has not served him." So here Jehovah prophesies that people would be able to see the distinction between one who serves and one who doesn't. And so many times in the missionary service we see how our brothers, even unknowingly, give a witness that helps worldly people make that distinction. Kennedy is a young man that lives in the west of Kenya. And he observed at school as a schoolboy that there was a young man and one of Jehovah's Witnesses in his class. And everybody else spoke against this young man. Everybody else criticized his way of life, his religion, his beliefs. Now, as Kennedy got a little bit older, to late teens, he observed that all the people in his area despised Jehovah's Witnesses, called them devil worshippers, said they didn't believe in Christ, said they didn't believe in Holy Spirit. But Kennedy wasn't a religious man. After a little while, though, seeing the kind of purposelessness of life, he started to think about where he was going and that really he should be a religious person. So Kennedy just said, he just sat down one day and said, "There's so many churches, which one's the right one?" And sat at home on his own, he said in his heart, "Well, the one that everybody hates is Jehovah's Witnesses. The popular ones, it can't be them. It must be the one that everyone's against." Now, he'd seen the Kingdom Hall about an hour from his house, so Sunday morning he rises at 6, he's on the road at 7, he walks an hour to the Kingdom Hall by 8, he sits outside the gate for 2 hours, the brothers come in, they start the meeting, he sits through the meeting, enjoys it thoroughly, he hears that field service will be at 12:30, so he sits for the meeting and field service, and the elder, as he takes the meeting and pairs everybody up, says, "I'll be with you today, my brother." And they arrange to study. Our brother is now a brother, and he was appointed as a ministerial servant not so long ago, just because he saw our brother's conduct amongst those who hate Jehovah's Witnesses. Of course, here in Malachi chapter 3, verse 18, it says there would be a distinction between those serving God and those not serving God. Many people think they are serving God, but then when they see how it's done properly, they make the adjustment. We'd like to finish with just two experiences that show how, by seeing our brothers conduct themselves in wisdom and seeing how false religion doesn't, people have been able to discern the truth. Samuel is 72 years old. He's been a pastor in the Mennonite church for 25 years. He lives out in rural Kenya, so the area where he is, there's only a small church with maybe 20 members. One day he receives a letter from the headquarters of the Mennonites in Kenya, and the letter says that every member should re-register so that the church can ensure the tithe is being received. The letter suggests that registration will cost 50 Kenya shillings. That's one day's wage for a person in rural Kenya. Samuel, he's kind of annoyed about this because he's been serving as their shepherd for 25 years and now he has to pay 50 shillings to be recognised by the church. He waits for the day for the big man to arrive from the headquarters. When the big man arrives, he takes Samuel aside and quietly suggests to him, let's say it's 70 shillings and then we'll have 20 shillings each to put in our pocket. Samuel is well annoyed. He sends him, just says, go. Take your church, go. I don't want to know. And he goes home and he thinks about it. And Samuel's an educated man. He was trained as a veterinary assistant in Tanzania. He goes home and he sits and he's brewing and he's stewing and he's annoyed. And he has some watchtowers there. So he just says, I'm just going to read these magazines of the Jehovah's Witnesses because of this. And he starts to read. A ministerial servant is his next door neighbour. He lives on the plot next door. 10 o'clock at night. Our brother opens the door. Samuel, no introduction. What do you mean Jesus Christ is not God? Our brother says, come in, Sam. No problem. Just come in. But what do you mean? Jesus Christ? It makes sense. Jesus Christ is not God, is he? And they start to talk about the truth. 10 o'clock at night. And Samuel starts to study. He comes along to the meetings, and just a short time after, it's our visit, and it's our very first visit to their congregation. So Tuesday, like happens here, we do our meetings though in an afternoon because there's no electricity. We announce the arrangements for the week, meetings for field service, when we're going to have the book study, all this arrangements. The following day, we meet for field service, we send the brothers off, Jazz goes with another sister. And as she goes to the first boma, which is an area with several houses built on it, Samuel turns up. Bag, shirt, tie. He comes, he sits down as Jazz is talking to the householder with another sister, and he listens to the discussion, watching like a tennis match. They finish the discussion. He walks away with Jazz. He says, you know the problem with that householder? Jazz says, what was the problem? He says, Kichwa kigumu. He means he's got a hard head. In other words, he wasn't listening. He says, right, where are we going now? And Jazz says, Sam, are you a publisher? What's a publisher, he says. Do this. Why don't you just wait for Brother David and he'll talk to you afterwards. Oh, okay. So he goes back to the brother's house. We have the Bible study at 11 o'clock and we have a nice discussion and he carries on his study. 6 months later we go back and I notice that his name is down as a lunch appointment. He's invited us to take food with him, even though not yet a brother. We go to the house and he says, he catches me outside, he takes hold of my hand, we hold hands with brothers in Kenya, it's okay. So we hold hands, even we swing as well. So Gareth, after the meeting, you and I. And he says, my wife has a question. She's not so pleased she has a question. Now, I know what the question is. So we go in, we take lunch, we sit down, Jazz and I, with the wife, and she says, "Now then, Mr. David, my husband, he's stood in front of the Mennonite church for 25 years and preached to them. And you Jehovah's Witnesses, he's been coming every week and you don't let him stand at the front to preach. What's the problem?" And you see, the problem is he's living with a lady, but he's no marriage certificate. So very tricky. So I said, "Mama, you know in Kenya, if we buy a piece of land, you always need a certificate from the government. Would you buy land without a certificate?" No. You can't buy land without a certificate." "Which is more important, Mama? Land or a wife?" "The wife." "So my brother Samuel, he needs a certificate for staying with you." "Okay," she says, "okay." So the marriage officer, we have a brother who's a representative marriage officer for the government. He comes, and this 72-year-old pastor and his lady friend, who he's lived with all his life, they come to the Mud Kingdom Hall and they get married in front of the congregation. A month later, he gives his first 5-minute Bible reading on the Theocratic Ministry School. We go back 6 months later, he's a publisher. This 72-year-old man walking around with his little case, and everybody knows he's a pastor. And when we go to the house, we hold hands again. He takes me round the back. He says, "Look, Dowdy." Call me Dowdy in Kenyan. "Dowdy, look." And in the field there's just mud and bricks and some corrugated iron and some wood. And I'm thinking, why is he showing me this? He says, "Mr. Dowdy, that was the church. I've knocked it down. I told the congregation, you want the truth, go to Jehovah's Witnesses." He had. August last year, district convention, he comes along. "Mr. Dowdy, I'm getting baptized." Not the national paper of Kenya, the national paper of Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda have their photographer. 60 people are baptized. Whose picture gets in the paper? Samuel's. He lives miles from anywhere. They don't get the newspaper. The following visit, Jazz takes the paper. "Do you recognize this man?" And there he is. In the national newspaper of 3 countries, a photograph of Pastor Sam's baptism at 72 years old. Just a final experience where the endurance and persistence of our brothers really helped a young man to get the truth. Lucas studied the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses in the year 2000. He studied the Require brochure. He read ahead, Trinity, Christmas, condition of the dead. Didn't like what he was reading, so he told them, "Don't come again." His friends told him, "You did well, because those people, you know, when they go in their kingdom halls, they take off the clothes, they go in naked, and they have a place where they slaughter the children. So you go in there, you're very wise not to study with those people." So he believes this. 2004, he gets very serious malaria. And he tries to cure it, but it just won't go. His friend comes along and says, "You know, my pastor says that he's been praying for you. And he can cure you. You must go to him." So now he's getting a bit desperate. He's a religious man anyway, so he says, "If this man's a pastor, let me go." So off he goes. He goes out down into the bush area and he meets with this man. The man takes him inside the house and starts to pray in a kind of very unusual way. And Lucas starts to get nervous because he realizes this is not a conventional pastor. This is like a witch doctor. And the man says at the end of the session, "Now you'll be cured, but it's 3,000 shillings. Now that's the entire month's wage for a city dweller in the west of Kenya. Now Lucas, our young man, he's got some money because he's got his own business in the city. So although it's a lot of money, he can manage it. But he's a bit reluctant to pay. So the man says to him, "If you think I'm not true, if you think I'm a false prophet, you will see that that's not the case. When you return home, you will walk inside your house, you will stand and say the Lord's Prayer 3 times, and the malaria will be gone." So Lucas pays up, he goes back home. When he gets home, his mother and the lady he lives with have just recoated the floor of the house in fresh cow dung. And he can't step in the house. So he can't say the Lord's Prayer. He realizes he has not been to any Christian pastor, but to a spiritist. So now, when he goes to bed, he starts to have bad dreams and to see funny things, and he starts to get very anxious. After 2 or 3 days, he returns to work in the city. He commutes each day on the public vehicle, and there in the marketplace where he sells fruit is his cousin, a young lady, and she has a copy of the knowledge book. So he takes the knowledge book, he flicks, and then he sees the chapter on Spiritism and reads it. As soon as he reads it, he realizes this is the explanation of his problem. He says to his cousin, I want this book. The cousin says, no way. This is my personal copy of this book. You want one? You have to get one. Well, where do you get them? I don't know. But how can I get one? I don't know. Now, in the marketplace where he sells fruit, some Europeans come to buy from him. Now, in Swahili, Kenyans call Europeans Mzungu. So he says in his heart, the Mzungu, they read books. The Mzungus are bound to have a book. So 2 Mzungus come, a man and a woman. He says, there's this book, Knowledge Leads to Everlasting Life. I want a copy. So the Mzungus say, we'll bring you one next week. They're missionaries who stay in our house. Next week they go with the knowledge book, and he says he remembers the Jehovah's Witnesses. They give you a book, and you have to study. He says, so probably these Mzungus, they'll want to be studying with me, so I'll get ready with my excuses. So they bring the book back, they place it. He says, I can't read it with you because I live 20 kilometers away. Our brother and sister, who he doesn't know are a brother and sister, say, no problem, we'll study here in the marketplace. He's already thought of that. No, we can't study here, it's too noisy, too many distractions. The brother says, no problem, there's a field just round the corner, we'll go and study there. He still doesn't know they're witnesses. So they go, and the first study it's interrupted because there are insects in the field that bite the sister. So the brother and sister say, what we're going to do, we'll go to our hall, our place of worship, for next week's study. So they come, they have a little Suzuki Jeep, and they pull into the marketplace. Now, Kenyans, when they always think Europeans are extremely wealthy. So Lucas, he comes out of the market, and he gets into the back of this Jeep with the 2 missionaries. And of course, all his market fellow workers are around, and he's like the Queen waving to them, because he's travelling with the Mzungus. And off they go, they wind their way through the city, and then they come to the open gate of the Kingdom Hall, and he sees where they're taking him. And he says, that's it, today I'm dead. He says, I'm going up to the door, and I prayed in my heart, God, you know that I didn't come here voluntarily. I trust you. When these people go in here and they start taking off the clothes and doing funny things, you know I have not come to do this purposely. So he goes in through the Kingdom Hall door, and it's all neatly laid out with nice seats. The brother and sister, they sit down, the clothes are on. They open the book, and he starts to study. That week when he went home, he said to people, I've been to the Kingdom Hall. All his neighbours are from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They all told him, Jehovah's Witnesses are fine. The only thing they get wrong is the Sabbath. He goes to the meeting that Sunday, and the talk is all about the Sabbath. He cannot believe it. He carries on studying. He legalizes with the young lady that he's living with, and he wants to become a publisher. Now, he and his wife are both Sunday school teachers. So now they've made the distinction between those who are serving God and those who are not serving God, those who are prepared to put up with trials, come what may, and do it Jehovah's way. So he wants to resign. But rather than just write and say, I've resigned, he writes and explains some of the Bible truths that he's learned, And in the last paragraph of his letter explains that he's resigning from the church, where his wife is still a Sunday school teacher. Now, we don't know exactly what happened that morning in the church, but it was possibly that the pastor didn't read the entire letter. Maybe he only read the beginning. So he hands the letter to a layman and says, "Read this, it's from Brother Lucas, he sent us a letter." So in front of the whole church, the man announcing explains all these Bible truths and then says, "Because your church doesn't teach this, I no longer, along with my wife, wish to remain a member." So the wife is kicked out that day from the Sunday school. He now is our baptized brother, auxiliary pioneering as often as possible. His wife has now come along in the truth. She's been studying, she attends all meetings, she's joined the Theocratic Ministry School, and she's looking forward to being a publisher. All that because those people could see the difference. When trials come, who is it endures? When people reject them, who is it persists? When economics are bad, who considers it a joy and a privilege to prove their faith? And all those people answered, "It's Jehovah's Witnesses." So, brothers and sisters, we've enjoyed very much to share some of those experiences with you. And I want to assure you of this. Every person that we've mentioned tonight, I've not heard about them. We know them personally, and their story they have related word for word to us, and we had it written down. But here's the lesson for us, isn't it? See, James said we consider it all joy when we meet with various trials. Perhaps economically you don't have such a trial like a Kenyan. Perhaps you've never been harmed by ethnic violence. Perhaps you've never driven to your Kingdom Hall and found hundreds of youths on the road burning tyres, murdering people from another tribe. But on a day-to-day basis, how many trials between us here are we right now enduring? Brothers and sisters, please believe when I make this statement that I'm telling you the truth. It is easier spiritually in Kenya than it is in England. The trials are different, it's true. But here, the pervasiveness of the system, advancing years, the climate, the spirit of the world. Our brothers and sisters in Kenya, when missionaries return, are very happy to hear about the endurance of you, brothers and sisters. Now, I'm not just saying that to finish the talk in a nice way. Sister Haworth and I, we've been in Kenya for 10 years. Quite often, once every year or two, we come back and we see what the brothers and sisters here are going through. So whatever happens to us between now and the Great Tribulation, whether we live in Kenya or whether we live in Bramley, it doesn't matter. We want to consider it all joy. We want to maintain our joy despite various trials.